This recording is the second in a series of recordings that look at an introduction to anatomy and physiology. This one specifically is going to look at levels of structural organization as well as the major organ systems and kind of briefly discuss their interrelationships. I kind of want you to understand kind of basics of each of the organ systems and in the basic, some of the structures that are part of them. So kind of first thing I want to address is look at structural levels of organization. Is we start from the atomic level and you build up to an organism. So you'll have increasing levels of complexity. So say this is Johnny Depp right here. Well, Johnny Depp is a compilation of a number of different things. So let's go all the way to the left and kind of look at these different levels. So you start at the atomic level. You got oxygen and carbon and hydrogen and nitrogen. Well, they kind of form various chemicals. So we're just going to kind of put these together and say you have the chemical level. And so, for example, here's water. And Johnny Depp is mostly water. Actually, not just Johnny Depp. We're all mostly water. Then what we have in each one of those chemicals, like water has certain functions, they have various functions, these different chemicals. Well, now we can actually obviously put these more in the chemical too. So you have various molecules. So here's glucose. And you have what we call macromolecules. So we have your carbohydrates. And I would recommend, if you don't know what they do, is do a little quick search on what the functions of carbohydrates are. You have your proteins, and do this with all the macromolecules. Proteins, you've got fats or lipids, and you've got nucleic acids. They all have various functions. Well, these are all components of a cell. So here's a cell at the cellular level. And not every cell looks alike. Just so you know, they're not all what you see in a textbook. Oh, all cells look like this. And within the cell, you have various structures called organelles. And each of those organelles provide certain functions for that cell. So ribosomes, for example, are needed for protein synthesis. The nucleus of this cell has where all the genetic information, kind of how do I make this particular protein? That information is found in the nucleus. Now the cells then make up our tissues. And we have 4 major tissue types. We have nervous tissue, and I'm just going to abbreviate. NT is nervous tissue. We've got epithelial tissues. Nervous tissue is all about control, kind of control, regulates things. Epithelial tissues line and cover. They're also components of glands. We have muscle tissues. Muscle tissues are designed to contract, say to move things. And then we have various connective tissues, a whole bunch of different connective tissues. And we'll even talk about that at later recordings. So the connective tissues connect, they do a lot of different things. So the tissues, different tissues are compiled together to form organs. So here's an organ. Now, there are a lot of different epithelial tissues. There's 3 different muscle tissues. There is a lot of different connective tissues. What do we use to make up an organ? Well, say for example, this is a picture of the stomach. We do have smooth muscle in that organ. We have a number of different connective tissues in that organ. The inside of the stomach is something called your simple columnar epithelium. We'll talk about the significance of that. And obviously we have nervous tissue in there, help to control motility and glandular secretions. So we put tissues together to form organs. Now the organ provides a certain function or functions. Well, stomach is going to be mixing up food, starting to break it down, stores that food, so it's designed a certain way. Well, the stomach is part of the digestive system. So your organs are part of organ systems. And so we'll look at your organ systems, and each of the organ systems have certain roles that help us survive or make us happy. So we have these organ systems that provide certain functions. Now these organ systems work together and make Johnny Depp the way he is. I mean, you don't like Johnny Depp, that could be you. Okay, so how your organ systems work determine how you work. And what happened, just think about it. What could happen if there's a problem along those lines? It could lead to your functioning not the way it should. So let's just kind of look at, just briefly right now, see, you have all these different organ systems. Now before we look at the organ systems and kind of what they do, because you have a table, and I'm not going to read to you, I'm going to have you look at it yourself. I'm just going to kind of go briefly over certain things. Is the organ systems are going to provide certain functions for us. And what I want to do is I want to look at some various processes in our body that are necessary for survival. And more than one organ system may be required for these various processes that I'm going to look at. So let's just start with movement. So muscle system, definitely people think about movement. Skeletal system, skeletal muscles are attached to the bones, and so when the muscles contract, those bones move. But why is movement so important or necessary for survival? Well, if you see the example here, here's the bear. These guys are running from the bear because if they don't run from the bear, they may be not around in a few moments. So that's definitely necessary for survival. You have, say, smooth muscle that lines a lot of the hollow organs in your body. And so, say here, this is the small intestine, here is the large intestine. If there is something, say for example, that's just not right, you ate some bad lettuce, it's actually important that we start increasing movements and also secretions to flush those potential harmful substances from the body. Obviously, it's uncomfortable for you because you have diarrhea, but it's important for that movement. Now, just normal situation, you need movement in that for the intestines, because you need that for digestion food. So movement's important in survival. Responsiveness. So we go back here just to the bear, is you have to recognize that that's a threat and respond to that threat. So nervous system is going to be involved in you seeing that bear, figuring out, probably not a good idea for me to stay here, and run. Also, you can apply it to what goes here. The intestines had to respond to that toxin. And so you have to be able to be responsive to changes in your body and respond to them in a certain fashion to allow you to stay alive. So it's necessary for survival. So a lot of organ systems would be responsible for this, but technically think about more nervous system, endocrine system, very important in responsiveness. Now growth is definitely necessary. So growth is, we're looking at increase in size of cells, and don't necessarily change the shape, but you get bigger. So growth is necessary. So if baby stays like that, not going to be very good. So we always need a little bit of growth. Now there's a lot of organ systems that are necessary for growth. You need building blocks to grow. You need energy. So digestive system is important for that. You need hormones. A lot of different hormones are necessary for growth. Just like, so for example, growth hormone, insulin. So endocrine system's important for that. You won't be able to get your energy to grow if you don't have oxygen. And so respiratory system would be important for that. So a number of different systems are involved in growth. Now reproduction, now it's how you would define reproduction, because reproduction is not what everybody, it's not just one thing. Sexual reproduction is where you have the production of offspring. That's actually necessary for survival of the species, but that is not necessary for survival of you. But this type of reproduction, where you have cellular reproduction, that is absolutely necessary to produce new cells. So for example, the epithelial cells of your body are constantly replacing themselves. And so you need to have cellular reproduction. So reproduction's important too. And like here, this would be obviously reproductive system, would be important in that. But this type of reproduction, a lot of things are necessary for those cells to reproduce, a lot of organ systems. Now, respiration, there's different types of respiration. Is you have to have the exchange of gases in your body, the level of the lungs. You need oxygen to go in and CO2 to go out, because CO2 is considered a waste product. We do use CO2 in different processes in their body, but we don't want to have too much. CO2 is a metabolic byproduct that we usually exhale. Oxygen is needed. Now, oxygen is needed here, but what we do is at the level of the lungs, that exchange is called external respiration. When we transport the oxygen to our tissues, and then we have that exchange where oxygen is going to those tissues and CO2, which was a metabolic byproduct, goes out. This is called internal, what you see here, internal respiration. Now, the oxygen most often is used to make energy. So when you're using cellular respiration, you're going to utilize oxygen as we call the terminal electron acceptor, and where you're breaking down molecules to get energy from it, and you're going to form ATP. And so you need ATP for a number of different things in your body. You need it for various digestive process, transport of a number of different things, building up. So you need energy all the time. And so obviously respiration is very important for that. Now, this obviously wouldn't work also if you didn't have any molecules that you can break down, like sugar or fats. And so obviously digestive system would be important in that too. Now, I'm going to lump these three things together: digestion, absorption, excretion. So when you eat food, you're breaking it down to its component parts in which your body has the ability to absorb. If we can't absorb a particular nutrient, we won't be able to use it. If we don't absorb it, we'll excrete it. That means we're going to eliminate it from our body. Now, sometimes we normally produce in our body when we're breaking down, say, proteins, we can get what we call nitrogenous waste, and we're going to eliminate that as urea, and we eliminate that predominantly in your urine. Other materials in your feces, we're going to excrete undigestible things. So you need to break down foods so we can get vitamins and minerals and various nutrients, so we can use that as building blocks for our body and for the use for energy. And if we have to get rid of things that we do not need. And the last, or actually not the last one, is one of the last ones, is we have circulation. So circulation is where we need to kind of transport things from point A to point B. So we have, say, your cardiovascular system, where blood vessels are transporting blood that contains hormones and nutrients and even gases. So we need to circulate those. And even that circulation, which you see here, is also actually important when we talk about temperature regulation, believe it or not. Assimilation, this is probably the hardest thing for people to understand what it is assimilation is where we take something and make something completely new out of it. And so, for example, say if we have proteins, or I should say amino acids, we put them together and we make proteins. I can take certain substances and make glucose out of them. So that's the process we call assimilation. So it's going to be a chemically different form. So actually that's going to be kind of the various things that are necessary for survival. It's not all of them, but kind of introduces you to various organ systems. And so what you have is in your notes, you have a table of the organ systems. And what I've just done here is kind of lump them together, kind of a generic thing, kind of what they have in common. There's definitely a lot of overlap though between organ systems and kind of functions. But I'll have you read your notes, because just me saying it, no, you can read it. Obviously, we're going to go more in depth as you go through each of the organ systems. But with each of the organ systems, it's important to know kind of basic structures, major structures that are part of them. And I've listed them for you. And some of the functions of those organ systems. So the first three, which we definitely cover in AMP1, they're kind of all part about support, movement, protection. And we'll go over those a little bit more in depth, because we're going to be doing all those organ systems. Like say your skin, that's definitely protective. That's the kind of first line of defense of keeping pathogens out of your body. The skeletal system, you think about the bones are really hard. They protect, say, your skull. Your skull protects your brain, and your vertebra protect your spinal cord. So definitely for protection. Movement, muscle, we talked about muscles involved in movement, and skeletal muscles are attached to bones, and the bones can act as levers, and they help with you moving your body. So we'll just kind of lump those together. So I want you just predominantly just look at your notes. You'll learn a little bit more about these in lab. The nervous system and endocrine system, we kind of lump them together as being about integration, coordination. Very important organ systems. We'll do nervous system in AMP1. You'll do endocrine system in AMP2. Is they coordinate a lot of things. If something happens in your environment, we'll have things that detect those changes, and either some component of the nervous system or endocrine system can interpret those changes and figure out what we need to do to respond to that. So endocrine system uses things like hormones. The nervous system uses your various nerves to be able to elicit certain changes. So those are going to be very important systems. The other ones, kind of all these ones are kind of lumped together as like maintaining your body. Say, for example, I mentioned you break down your food with the digestive system, so we can use that for energy and building blocks. What you don't digest, or things in the process of metabolizing, things you make waste products, that's where you need things like the urinary system to get rid of, say, urea. The urinary system, though, is also very important in water balance and electrolyte balance. You have your respiratory system we've mentioned about for gas exchange. Circulatory system, you're moving hormones around and the nutrients around and gases around. Now, lymphatic system, a lot of people, lymphatic system / immune system is involved in things like water balance, believe it or not. Actually, I don't want to say water balance per se, is in the process of substances moving from blood capillaries into the tissues. You may have a leakage of water in those tissues, but you need to return that water back to the circulatory system. Otherwise, your blood volume would get low. And the lymphatic system is important in that. But the lymphatic system actually is also important in the transport of fats that you've digested. It's also very important in protection, because it's part of the immune system. So you learn things about lymph nodes and your spleen and your thymus, your appendix. Those are going to be important in protecting you against from diseases. Now the last one is the reproductive system. You got the female and the male reproductive system. So this is probably the one system you necessarily do not need to survive. It's for the survival of the species. But reproductive system, these are going to be important in gamete production, the production of the sperm and the egg. There's a link between reproductive and endocrine, is the hormones that are produced, say, by the ovary in the female and the testes in the male. they're going to be important in that development of the gametes, but are also important in the secondary sexual characteristics of those, of the males and the females. And that's also important in the development of, say, for example, if a woman's pregnant, the development of that baby within her uterus. So we have that reproductive system. That's one of our organ systems too. So this is the last part of the second part of our introduction to anatomy and physiology.